Well, something really interesting is starting to happen more and more at our nation's schools. More and more military recruiters are showing up during your child's school day. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, if your children have come home and say, hey, during lunch today, there were a bunch of soldiers in our lobby. Like, what the heck's going on? They had a whole table on like Army stuff, and they were talking about submarines, and they were talking about, tanks, and they were talking about all sorts of stuff. We're not talking high school here. We're talking 7th grade on up, middle school. More on that in a second. But first, a question for you. I'll ask you in the audience here. Let me know in the chat below. Should military recruiters be allowed to come into your schools and recruit kids to join the military? Well, you might have noticed an uptick in this effort at your local schools. Parents have been letting me know, and you can let me know in the comments below. Have you noticed this at your kids' schools? Ask your kids, do they notice this? Let me know, because last week when I asked you, would you send your kids to die in the coming Middle East war or a war with China? Not one of you said yes. I'd sacrifice my son or daughter for these, big money elites that are running these wars. No, I'm not going to sacrifice my son or daughter for that, or a war against Iran, or any other boondoggle the Biden administration can come up with. Wants to send our military on. So KT, one of our viewers, KT just posted this on our. So KT, if you're watching, thank you for the comment. KT said, hell no, my grandsons will not go. Recruiters are hitting the schools. My grandsons were smart enough to tell them that no way, and especially no way, would Forrest Gump Joe Biden be their commander-in-chief. Also, she says, I come from 3 generations of military, and I know how they lie, telling you everything they know you want to hear. And I know that it's nothing like it used to be, she says. Thank you, KT. Well, recruiters are now doubling down on secondary schools. Yes, 7th graders on up can be forced to meet with recruiters. Now, they've had this in place since 1965, so this is not new. They've been allowed to do this. It's law under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which you can see right here. You can read it for yourself. You can go right through the Armed Forces Code and in this law specifically if you want to. I did today, going through all of this. And you can see the opt-out process. If a parent of a secondary school student doesn't want this, it can submit a written request to the local school and all of this stuff. So there's a bunch of things here, and this has been in place since 1965. Any school, though, that is receiving government funding must give military recruiters access to their students. You get the money, you give us access to your kids. That's how it works. Oh, you want this money? Let us walk around during your lunchtime and talk to 7th graders about tanks and what it would be like to, fight some Russians, I guess, like Red Dawn. Tell them about the benefits of going to war in Iran. Of course, this was instituted in the year 1965. Do you guys know what else happened in 1965, of course? The Vietnam draft. So in many ways, the draft at that time was simply totally trumped everything they were doing in schools. They didn't need to do recruiting efforts in schools. I mean, why? Because they had the military draft. So that really trumped it, right? So military recruiters didn't even have to go to schools to try to persuade you. You had no choice. This provision never really has been enforced, and schools have been fighting back, actually, ever since. In fact, the Associated Press just reported that most schools have put their foot down. But a new move by the Biden administration is doubling down on its efforts to reach young children in poor and urban areas.
Wait. So you're saying, let me get this straight. Mm-hmm. The government took wartime powers in 1965 and didn't give them back? That's interesting.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, they put this law in place and they never wound it back. They never...
Right.
Yes, exactly. I know that's...
Yeah, that's so unusual.
Shocking, really.
They tend to do that.
Yeah.
Here's from the Associated Press. Let me read this from the AP article. Army recruiters struggling to meet enlistment goals say one of their biggest hurdles is getting into high schools where they can meet students one-on-one. But they received a recent boost from a recruiting advocate whom school leaders couldn't turn away, the Secretary of the Army. Now, remember, the Associated Press, keep this up on your screen. The Associated Press is a mouthpiece of the CIA, of the Pentagon, essentially. So the Associated Press, the New York Times, the Associated Press is one of the lead news organizations that is a mouthpiece of the United States Pentagon, the Defense Department. So, of course, they're giving a glowing piece about how the Secretary of the Army is showing up at schools to try to talk to kids about the military. It's a glowing piece, right? So it says, during 3 days of back-to-back meetings across Chicago last month, Army Secretary Christine Wormuth spoke with students, school leaders, college heads, recruiters, and an array of young people involved in ROTC or junior ROTC programs. Again and again, she asked, what can the Army do to better reach young people and sell itself as a good career choice? In blunt sessions, I love this, in blunt sessions, recruiting leaders told her they need more and better access to high school students. So all of these like junior ROTC, they're like, we need to get on high schools. We need to go to middle schools. But they said the atmosphere can at times be unfriendly or worse with school leaders, many of whom are skeptical that the Army offers a good career option for their students. Quote, I'm going to use the word hostile, one recruiter told her. There's no other word to use. Oh. So in other words, let's go into these disadvantaged schools, and instead of talking about other career opportunities or improving these schools to give these kids more of a leg up in society, no, instead we'll tell these kids, hey, forget college, and look, you're kind of, you're not really going to go very far anyway. So military, it's the best option for you. We need bodies. We need warm bodies to throw in the Middle East.
Well, this is how David Goggins became a speaker, is that he started to recruit for the SEALs.
The Navy, yeah.
The SEALs and the Navy and the Special Rangers.
Right.
So he was, and he's such a gregarious character that he made a name for himself by recruiting other kids in schools.
Right, and they loved putting him out there for that,
and,
right? Like you came from a disadvantaged
there's something
background.
to that. Like he had nothing. He was going nowhere until
But right. Instead of fixing the problem, though, my point is like, okay, so we're going to throw billions of dollars and send military recruiters into schools. And instead of fixing the schools and like lifting up these like liberal cities, which have been destroyed, no, we're going to throw them billions of dollars from the Pentagon and tell them, the only way out for you is either to, try to play basketball or, join the military. We need you to go to the Middle East.
It's incredibly racist. Yeah, you're right.
Well, and remember back like before Iraq and all that the first time, they had like the GI Bill. You could go, you went into non-wartime, you could make a career out of the military, you could get some college and schooling and stuff like that. And now you're basically just joining and you're automatically infantry because there's a war somewhere they can send you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're not going to keep you. They need you now trained and ready to go. And, chances are that you're going to be stuck in Oklahoma City somewhere, just manning drones is highly unlikely. So yes, our infantry ranks have diminished significantly. Military recruitment is at a multi-decade low right now. Who wants to, after all these woke policies? So maybe this will work for them. They need bodies right now. But I thought these schools had to let recruiters in, don't they? I mean, that's the law since 1965. So I'm not sure where the hostility is coming in here, right? Well, they do have to let them in, but there's been really no enforcement of this law, I've learned. So the idea is, you've got to let these recruiters in, and if you don't, you'll lose your government funding. So, but it's not really happening. It hasn't really been enforced, but don't worry about it. Ohio Representative Max Miller from Ohio's 7th District this summer introduced a new bill to make sure that these schools open their door and let recruiters in, or you'll lose your funding. It's called, here's the bill. Here's the bill on your screen, H.R. 4522. Now, it's an amendment to that 1965 law. And he's basically, even though it's already on the books, the bill is to amend the 1965 measure to ensure access. It's basically saying, hey, that's an old law. It doesn't seem like it's being enforced. We really want to ensure it, though, this time. Like, that's really all it is. The language is pretty brief. It's a short amendment, and it basically just doubles down and basically forces the Secretary of Defense to, have that additional authority. It's ridiculous. The bill basically says, hey, that law that was passed in 1965 that gives recruiters access to schools, and if you don't do it, you could lose your school funding? Yeah, that bill. Well, let's actually start enforcing it now.
Or withhold funding from schools that are already scoring so crappy.
Right. So we'll take away even more funding because you don't want to let recruiters in to spend their day during your lunch break. It also requires schools to provide students' names, home addresses, and telephone listings to military recruiters so they can show up at your house as well. This is in the law. Telephone, home address, student's name. Hey, that kid was kind of eyeing me up during school over there when I was there, during lunch. I need to find out who that kid is. I'm going to show up at his house later tonight and talk to him, that 8th grader.
Yikes.
So the U.S. military has a massive recruitment problem. So is this the way to solve it? Or is a draft coming next? Because again, this 1965 law coincided with a military draft. Are we repeating history here again right now, or is this going to be totally separate? And
I would say that it's not so much a recruitment problem, it's an image problem. The U.S. military has an image problem across the world, and it's not like young kids don't see it. My daughter's seen this like her whole life. She grew up with this. It's sort of like all of the just like the bombing of civilians, like all of the wars that we're starting. It's like, this is not unknown. It's an image problem. It's not that people don't want to go to the military. They don't want to go to that military specifically.
Right.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So let us know your comments on this and your thoughts on this. Would you let your kids join the military right now? It's unbelievable. So this is what they're polling right now. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.